Hey everyone. Oh, there we go. I see you in there. So let me make sure I've got my friend going on too. Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. We're going to talk today about feminism. And the reason that I decided that we would talk about feminism is because everywhere I go, whenever I travel, people are asking me what in the world is going on in Utah. And I believe it comes down to a pretty strong feminist problem. Donna, can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Good. Okay. I believe that it's coming down to a pretty strong feminist problem on both the left and the right. Now, to say that I am not a supporter of feminism is not to say that I'm not a supporter of women having equal opportunities, of women having equal rights. It's to say that even from my normie point of view, where I've come from in just the last month, I've learned things about feminism that I think it's important that every person who believes in conservative values, who believes in protecting families, should learn. And they should learn what is, in my opinion, one of the biggest factors destroying Utah as we've seen it. So, what I have here, first, I have my friend Donna. Thank you so much for joining me, Donna. I'm excited for this
Hey.
conversation. Okay, so the first thing that most of us think, I believe, is that the first round of feminism, the first wave of feminism was really important. Women, from what we understood, were treated as less than human. They were oftentimes beaten. They had no rights whatsoever. That's the narrative that we've been taught, and that it was really important for women to have equal footing. So finding out about what's going on and specifically why it's important in Utah, and I think largely important in Utah, is because we just had a situation where, let me pull this guy up instead. We just had a situation where a single judge decided to redistrict Utah, just to completely take the plaintiff's argument of what they wanted that redistricting to look like, without any respect for legislators, any respect for our constitutional law, and just to say, this is the way that I'm going to do it. And that group is a feminist group. They like to pretend that they're nonpartisan, but it is a feminist group, very, very left leaning, and they've basically taken control. So I thought what we would do today is to dig into feminism on both the right and the left, and kind of just to um, figure out how in the world this is happening in a state like Utah. Answer my friends' questions from all over the nation, and also help you moms, you followers who happen to be male, um, get a little glimpse of what's happening. So I have my friend Donna. She's, I think, an absolute brilliant mind, and also somebody that I would call a normie like me, who just, we're open to learning more. So welcome, Donna.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought we would start with the first thing that I learned, which was that there was something called the Women's Rights Convention, and what they did was called the Declaration of Sentiments. Have you heard of that before?
I've heard about it, and I've been reading quite a bit about the feminist movement. But from what I've seen, it even goes back farther than that to the French Revolution, and that's kind of
Yeah.
one of the first jumping off points in regards to um, how we split up the pieces of the feminist movement. And so there's three that typically are accepted to gauge those pieces in time. And so it starts kind of at the French Revolution, and then the second one is called the temperance movement, and then you move into the abolitionist movement. But they all have a lot of similarities. You look at sexism, racism, classism, religion, and there's a whole lot of information to dig into.
Right. So, what did you notice about the French Revolution that you felt was tied into feminism?
Um, so the women wanted to fight against the government, and they went to their ruler and protested at the gates, and that's kind of where it started, and then it gets into more political movement. But there,
One
I
of
mean,
one.
there was a lot of disparity between men and women, and so some of that is true, and so that's kind of where it starts, as far as my understanding is concerned. Is they were
Right.
trying to bridge that disparity.
Well, and that's an interesting thing because when sometimes we see something as some of it is true and we run with that instead of looking at the nuance. So, the nuances that I found was that I mean, from almost the beginning of history, women have had power, whether they've had power in who they've been married to, whether they've had power in who they're the daughter of. It's oftentimes come down to a lot of the things that we argued about almost seem like they're more of a class issue than they are a biology issue.
Right. And so maybe as a preface to the conversation, it's important to remember the context and apply like the individual times and movements, because the general nature of like accepted practices within the populace, it's going to be different at each time period. And so I feel like context is really important also.
I agree. So let's just take a look. So the I do want to start with America because that's the one that we most know of. And Katie Elizabeth Stanton is someone that is predominantly known for the women's rights movements. And so one of the things that I found very interesting, there's an article, I don't think I have it in my slides, but there was an article that said that the origins of the feminist movement were a really great idea. They were needed, they weren't radical. Now, one of the things I found that I thought was quite radical in the first wave of feminism was that there was already 2 points. One was that women were superior. Women were oftentimes considered superior morally, um, and also the abolishment of the family structure was already there. Now, I want to be clear, that does not mean that every woman who was part of the movement wanted to abolish the family. But during that time, there were free love movements. There were communes where traditional marriage was not valued, where people, they had swinger type relationships. They also had relationships where older men were teaching younger women, girls, about sexual activities, and older women were um, in, introducing boys into the same thing. And this was in the first wave of feminism that this was happening. I find that very interesting because most people would not understand that the idea of tearing down families, specifically tearing down the so-called patriarchy, would be such an issue. Did you stumble across any of that? I don't think I sent any of that
I
over to
clicked
you.
that.
What did
I
you
think
say? Oh,
I was getting a call, so I had
okay.
to decline that call. Um, and then I lost my train of thought, and I apologize.
That's okay. I just wondered if you had heard any of the stuff about like the free love communes that were going on in the first.
Not that in particularly. I think a lot of people associate that with the free love hippie movement, but it's all kind of connected with this idea that feminism is like women need to be in charge, not necessarily that they just want equality, because I think that there's a lot of women that do believe that they just do want equality on
Yes.
on an equal platform, basically.
Well, and that
What
was so interesting because in the very beginning, when America was being settled, in Jamestown, women had rights. Women could refuse to come to the colonies. Women could come here as mail order brides, find their prospective husband undesirable, and say, I'm not going to marry this person. There's one really funny story that I told my students where a woman was supposed to get married, and when it said to love, honor, and obey, she said, not obey, which is something that oftentimes people would not, they would not think women would even have the right to say that, to say not obey. So I just find it very interesting that our that we're told one narrative, and I think that's still the same today. It was interesting to dig in to groups like Mormon Women for Ethical Government and to find out that a large percentage of them, I believe it's 68%, identify primarily as homemakers. And I wonder if they even understand the leftist leanings, because when I see a lot of the posters and the kind of promotions, they say things like, we're nonpartisan, this isn't political, think bigger than that. And I don't think that these women understand that their role is something that the left tends to diminish.
Well, I think that there's a lot there that goes into it without diminishing some of the purpose that I think that these women have, and I think most women have, is they want to have a voice and they want to be heard. And there are good things that have come from some of these feminist movements, but you have to take that into context with um they've played off religious base at each time. They will how do I put it in a manner of speaking that makes sense? Um, in certain classes, they will apply religion as if it hoists them up via their virtue rather than via their equality, basically.
Yes, so there was a movement called the White Feather Movement in the UK, and what they would do is they would shame people. They would shame men who weren't at war. Now, one of the things to remember is that when women couldn't vote, African American men also couldn't vote, and it came down to responsibility. There's a lot of things that said women were more, and I think this is true today, a lot of women are more concerned about the home and the hearth than they are about big government issues. So there's even been a recent study where they've looked at it and they've said women are more interested in local issues, local community, keeping it close to home, whereas men are more interested in global kind of large state issues. So I've posted this one up here that says registering for the Selective Service. The Selective Service is a federal agency within the executive branch of government that exists to readily resume a draft if necessary to provide a number of men needed by the armed forces in the event of war or other national emergencies. So one of the arguments that African American men had during the feminist movement was they thought they should be able to vote first because they had zero rights and they fought in the wars. And Katie Stanton got very upset with even Frederick Douglass, and to the point that there were racial epithets used where she said, um, basically, and I am not quoting here, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, these people are savages. Women deserve rights before these people do. And
And that's where racism plays into it as uh, there's racism, classism, sexism.
what there tends to be with ideology is the group always puts their desires above everyone else. So the other thing that tends to be with ideology is it's always about grievance. And the sad thing about feminism that I see a lot of is that it's people who, in my opinion, don't really have a lot to complain about. It's what I would call a luxury belief for a lot of people, especially out here. Like I said, it's like 63% of the women of a feminist organization are stay at home moms. They are well provided for, but yet they have a very authoritarian, I would say a devouring mother um, kind of instinct. And so the devouring mother, I feel like this is a pretty good picture of that. Let me see if
Ah,
I can get a better. Yeah. What do you think of that? Like, what do you think when you hear the term devouring mother?
it's
Well,
that's a little bit frightening to me.
I mean,
I think that particular picture it just makes me think of looks. It's a overbearing power grab.
right? Yeah, and I think that that fits really well. That a lot of these same people are the kind of like the munch house and mommies, the ones who want a victim narrative. They're desperate to find that victim narrative, even if they don't necessarily check any of the boxes, because it gives them power. And that is some of the stuff that I found when I was looking into Katie Stanton, was that she came from a privileged background from childhood and in marriage, and was still looking for a reason to have a declaration of sentiments. Now, when I think of sentiments, I think of emotion, right? So, like sentimental. And so, if I'm thinking about emotion, it's not necessarily how you feel, is not necessarily the truth,
Well, if something's true, it's true with or without how you feel about it.
right? And so, if something is true, and you feel a different way about it, no matter what you fight, no matter how much you push, it doesn't change the fact of truth. So, one of the things I find very interesting is that a lot of the feminist movement is about, um, like they support very leftist ideas. Take example DEI. Take example the West has been colonized and we need decolonization, etc. I would argue that forcing your ideas, your opinions on other people, and just making them have to deal with that is colonization.
Well, I think the most dangerous thing is people not being able to have a conversation anymore. And when we become emotional, we're not helping anyone, including ourselves. Because now all we're doing is just running off how we feel rather than first the facts and the fact that other people might have a different idea than you do. And that's okay, but we're not helpful to each other if we can't even have that discussion.
Well, and I think that in Utah, what I see a lot when I see those signs that say, for a better, we're going to do it better, I see a lack of humility. There is no desire to even have the conversation. It's just, we know best and we're going to plow through and we're going to take what we want. Again, going back to that devouring mother. We're going to take everything because we know best, because we're the best at nurturing, because we're the kindest. That's a huge one that I find extremely upsetting, that it's this kindness that is ultimately enslaving citizens. And what I
Well,
mean by
that
that,
one
well,
particularly, I like to call that one toxic empathy.
yes.
Because
Do you
empathy
want to
is
expand
it
that? Go
has
ahead.
well, empathy is useful when you're listening to people and trying to understand where they're coming from. Empathy is very useful. But when you take how they feel and think, and now you have to apply all of that to yourself, as somehow you need to take responsibility for having participated in when you didn't. That's something else. And if you're lying to them, that is not applying compassion and grace. And we need to do that. When you work with people, they need all of the things that you need. They need love, and they need listening ears. And sometimes things need to be objective, regardless of how you feel about it, because you can feel however you feel and still have things be objectively true. So, how do you work with that? It's very important how you show up and how you listen to people.
I love that you pointed out lying because I feel like there's so much dishonesty. Presenting yourself as, oh, I believe these things, I'm just like you, when ultimately your goal is extremely different. And knowing that you're talking to people. One of the things I recently experienced was I went to a Braver Angels event, and I know that the goal there is to bring people into believing a progressive outcome. But they'll say all we're doing is learning to listen to one another. But that's not it. It's more of we're learning to hear the language that's going to make our message palatable. And I think that's extremely manipulative.
Well, it's bothersome to me that when somebody's having a conversation with you, it's not enough just to allow you to have a conversation back and forth, but a lot of times they want to hear their opinion coming out of your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily logical at all. Even if you can agree with people on many things, but that doesn't mean you'll agree with them on everything.
Right. And I laugh at that one because especially being a minority, there's a lot of people. And I would say this is where I wanted to go with the that this can be on both the right and the left. If the ultimate view is authoritarian, we are right and you must do it exactly as we say. One, you're dehumanizing the people that you're expecting that from. You don't have any respect that they could have their own opinions. Um, and you use people. And I think that that is, I really don't see it as a big old line. I see it as a circle, and the sides are very, very close to each other. Because if one side says, you must be a progressive, you must be a victim, you must see yourself this way, and the other side says, you must, uh, you must only share my values and do it exactly the way I do. If you don't, you're against me. I don't see a huge difference between those two things. Do you have any thoughts?
Just that I think that people have their own right to make their own choices and to take information and truth and apply that to their own lives in regards to the decisions they make in their own lives. But on that note, I'm not responsible for the decisions that other people make in their own lives. And we have to have the ability to be responsible. Because when we talk about equality, we need to talk about the level of responsibility.
Right.
Everybody's equally responsible for the choices that they make.
Well, and the thing is that responsibility is removed a lot of times in feminism because you're really asking for someone to take care of you. Like I think fundamentally as conservatives, one of the things that we believe is that our rights are divine, that they're ours. And when we beg someone to give them to us, to justify them, to dole them out in just the right way, we're actually, I believe, we're kind of infantilizing ourselves. And definitely those people who are blindly following kind of like the Pied Piper, um, because they're just going, "Oh, well, I like what you say. That sounds good. That tickles my ears." When in reality, like, I think that devouring mother concept again, that devouring mother is like, "Hey, trust me, I'm going to keep you safe because that's what moms do." Right? "Hey, I'm going
Sometimes,
well,
but sometimes,
yes.
sometimes there are moms who don't keep their children safe.
Yes, that's very true. But in the ideology, that is a way of saying, "Come to us." Um, One of the things after Charlie Kirk was killed that this particular group went and did was went to the Capitol and said, "Turn towards us," which was, I think, dishonest and very much the opposite of where Charlie was standing. I mean, the last words that Charlie said, some of the last words that he said were, "I love and I respect Utah." Specifically, he was talking about Mormons. And he said, "I love and I respect Mormons, but they need to get their mojo back." He was saying the woke needs to stop. And yet, the woke group went to the Capitol and said, "Turn towards us, turn towards us."
And that
And I,
has always been a part of feminism, where it's part of a virtue signal, as far as I understand that. Because you can't take a group of religious practitioners and practitioners and add that to your name without saying I represent all of those people, whether they agree with your sentiments or not. And I think that that's not right because you bank on that and it's on purpose.
yeah,
And people will see that and join it without ever understanding what it is, because I think a lot of people just want to do good. But there's also
right.
a lot of people that don't want to do good.
Right. People have ulterior motives. And when I was talking with my students and explaining this movement, and when I explain it with, the quotes in front of me. So it's not a matter of I'm making something up here. This is literally what they're saying. But even so, the kids will be like, "Well, I think that maybe there were some people who believe this, but other people who didn't." And I agree. 100% there are good people in movements, but those who know that they're leading people astray on purpose for power, I have zero respect for. Um, and I think that that tends to be a large part of this movement that women somehow have a better understanding of all things moral. And also that the ends justify the means. So it's okay to lie. It's okay to present ourselves as something we absolutely are not, because in the end, progress is what's most important.
But you can't have true progress without equal parts.
Well, that depends on how you define progress. If you define progress as moving forwards and as an end to history, a place where we get to some amazing utopia, which is what a lot of true believers believe about this, then progress is anything that has to happen in order to get there. The problem is that so many people don't understand that that is the definition. That the goal is we just want to get to this place where everything's perfect, but the question is under whose standards?
Right. Well, I'm gonna go Aerosmith, and it's life is it's a journey. It's not a destination. Like you're never gonna get there because you have to put the human aspect into everything, because that's what you deal with on a daily basis is humans, and they need grace, and everybody makes mistakes, and we are complicated people, even though we're just creatures of habit a lot, but there's not an end goal. that you're just gonna arrive. So this side and that side, we're just all gonna arrive together. That's not the way that it works. And it's
Well,
it's a
I think
process.
the scariest thing is that it's not about arriving anywhere together. It's always all of these ideologies, all of these studies are always about authoritarianism. They're always about you're going to accept it, you're going to disagree better, you're going to do whatever it takes, whatever I demand of you to come along. And if you don't come along, you're going to be left behind and not in peace. I think that's a big part of the problem is that you are not going to be left in peace.
Well, that depends on what kind of peace you're talking about. Like pieces or internal peace and salvation. And now I'm
Right.
just making light of something that's fairly serious, but yeah.
I Okay, so I want to flip and talk about the right wing version of this because there is right wing feminism. There are groups that are destroying within conservative movements. And this is why I think so many people outside of Utah are shocked about what's going on because they're like, but Utah, and they see Utah still as Little House on the Prairie, which
Yeah, it's
we're
not
much more
that.
like the Real Housewives than we are Little House on the Prairie. So
I haven't watched the latter, but
yeah, I haven't either. I just see the billboards and I just know that image matters. Oftentimes I feel a lot of Utah leans towards manufactured, including manufactured kindness. And I also think that doesn't represent the everyday person.
well, I think the important thing with kindness means that you have to apply truth to that. Otherwise, it's not kind. It's just fake.
Right. It's manufactured. And we are in a place where we're manufacturing everything. I've shared some images before about the um I want to the index. What's it called? You know what I'm talking
The
about.
the dignity
Dignity
index.
index, right? And so that's manufactured kindness. A lot of the people who push for that are I have this image because I think it
I don't know
fits.
how you put kindness on an index in a category. Kindness is lengthy and it's very involved. If it's true kindness,
I feel like kindness is when people are left alone instinctual for most of us. We have to be taught what quote isn't kind. Otherwise, we just know instinctually. We know that's a person I don't want to be around because they don't make me feel very good. But when somebody decides that the language that you use is unkind because it honestly doesn't fit a progressive agenda, then we have something else going on. And again, I would call it colonization. I would say that we are being socially colonized when somebody else gets to decide. Because for me, I think that if I am a person of faith and I believe certain things, and a huge part of what I believe is love your neighbor as yourself. But more than that, I believe in loving and being obedient to what my scriptures say God says.
I
Okay.
don't I don't love necessarily the word colonized so much as conditioned.
Okay. How would you describe colonized and why do you have an issue with that?
Well, it's not that I have an issue with it, but typically that runs in certain circles as uh, a group of people coming to conquer, and they take over everything. But I feel like conditioned is a better word for me when I'm describing it. Not that you can't, because if you want to, then that's fine. If that's how it works out in your brain, just for me, conditioned is better because it's a slower process, like
Right.
a
Okay.
spoon feed rather than we come in, we take everything right now. It's slower.
Right.
So I mean, how do you take over people? Not necessarily. If you want them to comply, then you have to get them to accept it.
Right. And so I think I've actually so I think that they believe this is a kinder way of colonizing. Hey, we're not putting you in prison camps. Hey, we're not, beheading
Well,
you.
thanks for that.
Right. But we're still rooting out your deeply held beliefs. We're still saying that if you don't agree to use the language that we say, you may find yourself without a job or unhireable in the first place. So that's why I call it colonization, because you're still saying you will do what I tell you to do, or life's going to get extremely hard. When I believe that those things we're being told to do are often dishonest, and more important than that, I think they are, for lack of a better term, raping my faith. That's honestly how I feel about it. If you come in and you say that the scriptures that I hold dear and believe that I could, you know, go to hell if I don't believe them, and you're going to tell me that I don't get to because my big government has told me that I now have to adopt new ideas that I think are extremely stupid. I think it's extremely stupid that I have to acknowledge, because the progressives have told me that language really means nothing, but yet language can be harmful, right? Language means nothing in that there is no definition of woman,
Well,
but
but they're
also it's
also
harmful.
saying language is violence.
Yes,
But if you cannot define something, then you don't know what it is.
right.
But
So
if you
it
can make
is
it not exist, then you can redefine it as whatever you like. But
right.
it still goes back to it's a power grab.
Right. And that power grab is what I would call colonization. Is it softer? Yep. Which means more people are likely to just be slow boiled into it because it's softer than, when people are going through something extremely brutal, they're more likely to stand up because they see it very clearly. I better
Well,
fight.
that's why our founding fathers said that most people won't do anything until they're exposed to a level of despotism.
Yes.
And that is literally what you're describing.
Yes. And I when I talk to young people, a lot of people will say, I don't see how we're at a war because nobody's being shot in the streets. Meanwhile, like I said, I was recently at a conference with the top defenders in the nation. Many of the top defenders in the nation were there, and they all were saying something has got to give because we're going to find ourselves in jail in, a couple of years. Just to believe and to say what we believe is going to be something that's criminal. And I think that that needs to be brought back to Utah because there are people who feel that way. There are women who feel that way, who are gaining ground. They just took over an entire school district, a brand new school district, and they were dishonest in what they believe. They were putting out signs that said this is what they stood for when it wasn't what they stood for, because the means justify the end, because there is no truth but power. And they're very connected because they were able to get a judge, you know, to do this. And in my opinion, and this is not, we don't share the same opinion necessarily. We might, we may not. But in my opinion, what this did was got rid of the one strong conservative member and it keeps everybody who's not a threat. So those other seats are fine because they go to people who are not strong conservatives. Um, and that's on purpose because it has to move the goal forward. And
Well, I think
go
whether
ahead.
we agree on who's more conservative or who isn't, uh, I think it's kind of a takeover push for a a Marxist practice, basically, is how I see it. The one of the fundamental basics of Marxism is to accuse your opponent of what you're doing to cause confusion. So if you deem it a right thing or a left thing, for example, the left thinks the right's doing it, and the right thinks the left's doing it. But it muddies the water because now nobody knows who's doing what.
I agree, and I also don't because I think that there's more proof that one side is there's more objective proof. There are things like the Arctic Frost campaign that make it very clear what's going on. There's exposing digital media literacy that makes it very clear what's going on, and the media won't touch those things. And
Well, that's
so
because it's uncomfortable.
I think well, I think it's because it doesn't go along with the agenda that those groups want. And so I do, my personal belief is that our media is extremely biased and
I agree with that.
um that is where those things go. Now, this last picture that I have is a picture of a tree. And what I think Utah is really facing is a battle between the feminine and the feminist. The feminine woman doesn't mean that she stays at home and has, 6 children plus or whatever else. It just means that she respects the rule that men and women are equal partners. It means that she raises up her children, especially her boys, because I think the selfishness of being willing to destroy boys just so that you can revel in your sentimentality, um, it seems sick to me. It seems sick because, I mean, especially if you gave birth to those children, but even without giving birth to those children, I know so many boys, I teach so many boys, and the idea that they should be taught that they're less than because people want more, and there's no respect for the fact that, I mean, boys can be just as loving, just as kind, and they can hurt just as much as a female. They've had so many of their rites of passage stolen from them. What I mean by that is Scouts used to be a real strong program for helping boys find direction and having mentorship, and watching that turn into, well, I called it Scouts, which is what it's called now, but it used to be called Boy Scouts, right? It used to be a place for boys. A lot of the traditions that they would have in Scouts, I actually went to one camp that's trying to hold it together, and they do a lot of like the Native American traditions, those rites of passage to become men. And so many of our young men don't even know what that is. They could not define manhood today because it's been kind of beaten out of them by this idea that you need to move to the margins to put the marginalized in the center.
Well, then that's not equality, is it?
Again, when your views are there is no truth but power, and when you get to reframe language, then you get to change what equality means. So one of the things that you and I were talking about before we got on was that when good men are beaten down, the only ones who come up to the front are the bad ones.
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, that one I point out all the time, that good men who are good, strong, masculine men protect women and children. And when those men are not allowed to do so, then who comes forward are the ones that mean to rule and take.
Or even just to harm and use, because I think that in a feminized culture, which I think this is a really interesting. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how wokeness is a result of a feminized culture. And when you think about that, think about when men go out and fight. When men go out and fight, they're fighting to protect what's theirs. They will beat the crap out of a guy who looks at their girlfriend, right? I mean, and people might call that toxic masculinity. I'm not going to disagree with that, but their nature is to go out and protect what's theirs. They can even have respect afterwards for the person that they fought. I'm reminded one time of when we moved here, my son got picked on by another boy for a really long time, and one day he couldn't handle it anymore, and he turned around and he hauled off and gave the kid what for. And then he was very upset with himself because he'd never lost his temper before. Then he and the boy became friends. Women tend to crush what's inside, what threatens them from inside. And what we have, my argument, is a big, huge battle between the feminine and the feminist. The feminist, oftentimes, Utah's an interesting place because this isn't the case in Utah, but oftentimes the feminist does not have children. Oftentimes the feminist is not married. That is not the case in Utah. Our feminists are often sitting right next to you in a pew, but they still mean to devour. And sometimes I think it's because they failed at raising their own children. Sometimes.
Now that one I can't speak to, but it's hard for me to get the pull for that, I guess. Just
Yeah.
because I respect my husband and he
Yeah.
respects me, and this is an equal partnership, but we're working together for the same goal.
Right.
And I don't need to be equal to him because I'm not him. And that's not my role. Just like he's not trying to be equal to me in the sense of he needs to be me. We're
Right.
supposed to be individually unique for a reason, to complement each other in the goals that we're trying to reach.
What I mean by failed at raising their own children is there has to be something that consumes you to make you feel so guilty that you need to put your nose into other people's business to the point that you need to advocate for huge government for the people who don't want it. Like, if you don't tend to your own home and your entire existence is out there doing and as you said earlier, virtue signaling, I am a good person, believe that I'm a good person, as opposed to being confident in your role in your family. And maybe your family is bigger than just your family. Your family, my family is only 3 people. Maybe your family is bigger than that. It's your community. But when you're confident in that, you don't have to be an authoritarian towards other people. You don't have to take over everything that they hold dear. That's what I see feminism on both sides doing. Taking over, defining. On the right, it looks like, how dare you teach this thing? No child should be exposed to that thing. When it's like not a bad thing. When it's something like 1776 Unites, and it's how to add more culture into history because there are all sorts of people who've lived in America, right? But it's not a grievance culture. You're telling beautiful stories, you're just bringing more in, and when somebody says, "No, they should only have this as their education," that's fine for you, but when you become authoritarian when you say what other people have to do as well.
Yeah,
And I I,
I agree
I
with
see
that.
that on both sides.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly because it exists on every scale, everywhere.
Well, and if you don't teach the good, the bad, and the ugly, someone else will. And so I always try to teach that the good, the bad, and the ugly, and wrap it around to the beautiful, wrap it around to the unifying. Because
Well,
if you
I
don't,
like to
go ahead.
teach my kids that there is victory in defeat because people have this enormous capacity to rise up like the phoenix from the ashes and take what they've learned and become better.
And that means you're teaching hope, which is the difference between a culture, right or left, that is always, always teaching grievance, always destroying. I think that's extremely unhealthy. And I think that it's gaining more and more ground. We have people who should all be on the same side devouring each other from within because they have been, I would say, conditioned. They've been conditioned to look for the bad. And maybe that's a remnant of an education system that teaches you to look for the bad. I don't know that that's so much of an education problem as much as it is a cultural problem. Because if you turn on many, many pages of the news, that's what you get constantly.
Well, there's a
But I do think
whole
that
lot of
critical
division
pedagogy
everywhere.
does the same. What'd you say?
I said there's a whole lot of division that's
There is.
that is intrinsic in the fabric of the wrongs from this nation
Yeah.
that people don't want to look at because it makes them uncomfortable. But then, on the same note, then they can't have any conversations about what is objectively true either.
Well, I think that the wrongs of this nation are no more egregious than the wrongs of any other nation.
I'd
And
agree
if
with that too.
that's that's the human condition. We fail all the time. We're not gods. Now there are people who believe that that is ultimately the goal, to be to be gods, and I would encourage people to stay away from that. Once again, if you can be a god, then that means that you are inherently above other people. And so what I'm talking about there are the people who jump into um they jump into the spiritualness of womanhood, that they're above everyone else because they are divine just in the fact that they have female parts or a female heart. But I think throughout history,
Well,
men
I
have
think
done.
I can have divine nature without making me less than or more than anyone else.
Right.
Because if I can
Yes.
have divine nature, so does everybody else.
Right. But when you have that ideology of I've got to be better than others, then that's something different. Ultimately, what I think is that that strips you of humility. And I think a huge part of being a good, respectful, honorable human is humility. And I think that ultimately is the issue. People feel that they are women feel that they are so much better. I need to make that clarification because it's going to get me in trouble. Women who buy into this ideology feel like their fulfillment comes from believing that they're better than others, that they're wiser, that they're more enlightened than others. And that is pride in a nutshell. And so if you were to look at what the issue is I think we have so much pride. It's a crazy amount of of my view is more valid than yours. And throughout history, and I believe it's in the Bible, but I'm not positive. So if you want to look it up, you can, and we can finish on that. But I think it's pride comes before the fall, always. And we are an extremely prideful. We're in an extremely prideful state right now.
And that's, again, part of the human condition.
Right. But these isms, these feminism, wokeism, racial superiority on either side, all of those are pride. And I think that if someone were to say, what is going on, I would say our pride is not in check. And I'm really concerned about where that leads. How our boys especially, but remember, if our boys are hurting, if our boys can't be productive, happy members of society, then how are they going to be productive, happy spouses? So this arrogance, I think, hurts everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
thank you.
I gotta go, but I wanted to end on a note of I was raised to believe that you should never look down on anyone unless you're helping them up.
I love that.
And, and I really, really like that because then it keeps you on a level where you should be if you're looking to help people.
I love that.
And that's including yourself.
Yeah. That's that's beautiful, and I think that is the place where I believe we can get back there. So I don't want to leave people on that note, but I just am I was so shocked to open up and to just see that somebody would just stomp on so many people like that. And also that so many people would pose for years to get their agenda and not really care about the people who are trying to be honest. So, um yeah, I think that our human I think humankind is meant to love each other, and we can't love each other if we're wrapped in arrogance. So I agree. Let's lift each other up. Everyone, thank you for joining us, and hopefully you will catch this in the replay, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Take care.